take off your shoe. If you are somewhere you cannot take off your shoe, remember the last time you saw your bare foot. Look at your second toe. The one next to your big toe. Is it longer? If your second toe extends past your big toe, even by a few millimeters, you share a trait with roughly 20 to 30% of the human population. The ancient Greeks called it the mark of beauty. Indian culture called it the mark of a leader. Renaissance sculptors carved it into every goddess they built. And for centuries, nobody questioned whether it meant anything beyond aesthetics. It does. And what it means goes back further than Greece, further than Rome, further than any civilization that ever gave it a name. Because the reason your second toe is longer than your first is not about beauty. It is not about leadership. It is about a bone in your foot that stopped growing earlier than the one next to it. And the genetic code that told it to stop has been tracked across 930 markers in the human genome through migration patterns spanning tens of thousands of years, all the way back to the moment your ancestors stood up on two legs and started walking across a continent. Your second toe is not a cosmetic quirk. It is a fossil, and the story it tells about where you come from is older than any written record on Earth. Subscribe, because what your feet have been carrying is a message that nobody taught you to read. The first thing to understand is that your second toe is not actually longer. Your first metatarsal, the bone behind your big toe inside the foot, is shorter. The second toe looks longer because it starts further forward on a bone that extends further toward the front of the foot. This distinction matters because it changes what you are looking at. You are not looking at a toe that grew too long. You are looking at a bone that stopped growing too early. The first metatarsal's growth plate closed prematurely during development, resulting in a shorter bone that sets the big toe further back, giving the second toe the appearance of projecting beyond it. The condition was first described medically by Dudley Joy Morton, an American orthopedic surgeon in the 1920s. He called it a metatarsal disorder. The world called it Morton's toe. The Greeks called it something else entirely. In ancient Greece, this foot shape was considered the ideal, not one ideal among many. The ideal. The standard of physical perfection that sculptors were trained to reproduce. Every major statue of a Greek god or goddess, from Aphrodite to Zeus, was carved with a second toe extending past the first. The Venus de Milo has it, the caryatids of the Erechtheion have it, the bronze warriors of Rheias have it. The Greeks did not consider this a medical condition. They considered it divine geometry. The foot of the gods had a longer second toe because the gods were perfect, and perfection required that specific proportion. The Romans inherited the preference. Roman statuary continued the tradition, and when the Renaissance rediscovered classical art in the 14th and 15th centuries, the longer second toe returned to sculpture. Michelangelo's David has it. Botticelli's Venus has it. The Statue of Liberty, designed by Frederick August Bartholdi in the 1870s using classical proportions, has it. The most famous statue in America has Morton's toe for over 2,500 years. From Athens to Rome to Florence to New York Harbor, the longer second toe has been carved into humanity's most important sculptures. Not because the sculptors had the condition, because they believed it represented the ideal human form. The question nobody asked for 2,500 years was why? Why does this variation exist? Why is it so common? And why did ancient cultures, separated by centuries and thousands of miles, independently arrive at the same conclusion about what the perfect foot looked like? The answer was not in the art. It was in the DNA. Ancestry DNA, the consumer genetics company, identified over 930 genetic markers associated with second toe length. 930. That is not a handful of genes controlling a simple trait. That is a genetic architecture of extraordinary complexity governing the relative length of two bones in your foot. For context, eye color is influenced by roughly 16 genes. Height is influenced by roughly 700 to 1,000 variants. Second toe length, at 930 markers, is genetically as complex as height itself. Your body invested as much genetic infrastructure into the shape of your foot as it invested into how tall you are. That level of genetic complexity does not happen by accident. Evolution does not maintain 930 markers for a trait that does not matter. If the relative length of the first and second metatarsal had no functional consequence, genetic drift would have simplified the architecture over time. The fact that 930 markers have been preserved suggests that the variation is under active selection. Something about the difference between a longer first metatarsal and a shorter one has been mattering to human survival for a very long time. The trait runs in families. If your parent has a longer second toe, your odds of having one increase significantly. The heritability is strong enough that Ancestry DNA can predict your toe shape from a saliva sample with meaningful accuracy. When you spit in a tube and send it to a lab, the algorithm checks your 930 markers and tells you whether your second toe is likely longer than your first. Your toe shape is written into your genome the same way your eye color and blood type are. It was inherited from your parents, who inherited it from theirs, through a chain of ancestors that extends back through every generation of your family for as long as families have existed. But here is the part. The DNA companies do not tell you. The markers are not evenly distributed across populations. Different ethnic and geographic groups show different frequencies of the trait. Roughly 20 to 30% of the global population has a longer second toe, but within specific populations, the frequency varies significantly. Studies of the Idoma people of Nigeria found prevalence rates of roughly 37%. European populations average 20 to 25%. East Asian populations tend to show lower rates. These are not rigid boundaries. The trait appears in every population on Earth. But the frequency differences tell a story about migration, genetic mixing, and the pathways through which this trait traveled as humans spread across the planet. If you have made it this far, hit like and subscribe. The next chapter explains why this trait exists in the first place. And the answer has nothing to do with beauty. It has to do with walking. Human beings are the only fully bipedal primates. We are the only ones who walk upright as our primary mode of locomotion. And the transition from four-legged movement to two-legged walking, which occurred roughly 4 to 6 million years ago, required a complete restructuring of the foot. A chimpanzee's foot functions like a hand. The big toe is opposable. It grips branches. The foot is flexible, mobile, and designed for climbing. A human foot is the opposite. It is rigid. The big toe is locked in line with the other toes. The arch provides a spring mechanism for forward propulsion. The entire structure is optimized for a single function, walking and running on flat ground over long distances. The transition from climbing foot to walking foot required changes in the metatarsal bones. The first metatarsal, behind the big toe, became the primary load-bearing structure. During walking, roughly 40 to 60% of your body weight passes through the first metatarsal and big toe during the push-off phase of each step. The big toe is not decorative. It is the launch pad. Here is where Morton's toe enters the evolutionary story. When the first metatarsal is shorter than the second, the weight distribution during walking shifts. Instead of loading cleanly through the big toe, the pressure transfers to the second metatarsal head, the ball of the foot behind the second toe. This altered loading pattern changes the biomechanics of the entire gait cycle. For some researchers, this variation is a functional disadvantage. The altered weight distribution can cause calluses, metatarsalgia, and instability during high-speed running. The theory is that a shorter first metatarsal is a less efficient platform for bipedal locomotion, a remnant of an older foot architecture that predates the fully modern human walking foot. But other researchers disagree. They point out that Morton's toe has persisted at 20 to 30% prevalence across the global population for tens of thousands of years. If it were a pure disadvantage, natural selection would have reduced its frequency. The fact that it persists suggests it either confers a subtle advantage in some environments, or it is genetically linked to other traits that are under positive selection. One hypothesis is that the Morton's toe foot provides better balance on uneven terrain. A foot with a longer second metatarsal distributes weight across a wider surface area during lateral movements. On rocky, mountainous, or forested terrain, this wider distribution could provide stability advantages that a narrow first metatarsal dominant foot does not. The people who lived in mountainous regions of Greece, the highlands of West Africa, the hills of Central Europe may have been subtly selected for a foot architecture that prioritized stability on slopes over efficiency on flat ground. The terrain shaped the foot shaped the gene pool, and the gene pool carried the trait forward through every generation since. Your second toe is not longer because of grease. Your second toe is longer because of terrain. Terrain that your ancestors walked on thousands of years ago, in a place you may never have visited, on ground that's selected for a bone structure you carry without knowing why. Anthropologists have classified human foot shapes into 5 primary categories. These categories are named after ancient civilizations, which has caused significant confusion about what they actually mean. The Egyptian foot. The big toe is the longest. Each subsequent toe is shorter than the one before it, creating a smooth diagonal taper. This is the most common foot shape globally, found in roughly 50 to 60% of the world population. The name comes from ancient Egyptian art, where this shape was the standard representation. The pharaohs were depicted with Egyptian feet. The mummies that have been examined confirm that this shape was prevalent in the Nile Valley population. The Greek foot. The second toe is longer than the big toe. This is Morton's toe, found in roughly 20 to 30% of the population. Named for Greek sculpture, not for Greek genetics. The trait appears across all ethnicities and geographic regions. The Roman foot. The first three toes are approximately equal in length, creating a squared-off profile, found in roughly 10 to 15% of the population, named for the foot shape depicted in Roman military statuary, though the actual frequency among ancient Romans is unknown. The Celtic foot, a wide foot with a prominent second toe and a generally squared shape, sometimes described as a combination of Greek and Roman features. The classification is less well-defined than the others and is primarily used in folk anthropology rather than clinical literature. The Germanic foot, a wide foot with a large big toe and all other toes tapering sharply. The classification is the least standardized of the five and varies depending on the source. Here is the important part. These names are cultural labels applied to biological variation. Having a Greek foot does not mean you have Greek ancestry. Having an Egyptian foot does not mean you descended from the pharaohs. Having a Roman foot does not mean your ancestors marched in a legion. The foot shapes are real. The names are historical artifacts. The actual genetic story behind your toe length has nothing to do with which ancient civilization happens to share the name. It has to do with the 930 markers in your genome, the terrain your ancestors walked on, and the biomechanical pressures that shaped the human foot over millions of years of bipedal evolution. The Greeks did not invent the long second toe. They noticed it, they idealized it, and they carved it into marble with such precision that 2,500 years later, people still assume it belongs to them. It does not. It belongs to the human species, and the genetic code that produces it has been circulating through every population on Earth since before Greece was a civilization and before Rome was a village. Your foot shape is not your ethnicity. Your foot shape is your evolutionary history, and the two are not the same thing. So look at your feet one more time. If your second toe is longer, you carry a genetic variation encoded across 930 markers in your DNA. It was inherited through a chain of ancestors stretching back thousands of generations. The bone behind your big toe stopped growing slightly earlier than the bone behind your second toe during fetal development, a pattern that may have provided your distant ancestors with better balance on uneven terrain. The ancient Greeks looked at this foot and saw perfection. Michelangelo carved it into David, Bartholdi built it into the Statue of Liberty, and 20 to 30% of every human population on Earth carries it, regardless of whether their ancestors ever set foot in Greece. If your big toe is the longest, you carry the most common foot architecture in the species. Your first metatarsal is the primary load bearer during walking, providing maximum efficiency for bipedal locomotion on flat terrain. The Egyptians carved this foot shape into the walls of temples. It has been the dominant human foot architecture for as long as there have been humans, and it remains so today. If your first three toes are roughly equal, you carry the Roman variation, a squared platform that distributes weight evenly across the forefoot, less common, less studied, and no less a product of the same millions of years of evolutionary engineering. None of these shapes are defects, none of them are advantages in absolute terms. They are variations, expressions of a genetic code that has been diversifying since the first hominins stood up on two legs and started walking across Africa 4 to 6 million years ago. The foot you walk on today is the current version of an engineering project that has been running for longer than any civilization, any language, and any idea that humans have ever produced. The shape of your foot predates everything you have ever known. It predates your country, it predates your religion, it predates the invention of writing. It is older than every border on every map. And it has been walking underneath you, carrying the genetic memory of where your ancestors came from for your entire life. 930 genetic markers, millions of years of evolution, carved into marble by the Greeks, built into the Statue of Liberty by the French, and on your foot right now, unnoticed, carrying a story that started before history began. Now you know how to read it. Your second toe is not a random quirk. It is a 930 marker genetic trait inherited through thousands of generations, shaped by the terrain your ancestors walked on, idealized by the Greeks, carved into the most famous sculptures in human history, and built into the Statue of Liberty. 20 to 30% of the human population carries it. Every ethnicity, every continent, every population on Earth, it is not Greek, it is human, and it has been on your foot since the day you were born. Drop a comment. Is your second toe longer? Is your big toe the longest? Are your first three toes equal? Let us see the numbers. Subscribe for more, share this with someone and make them look at their feet. We will see you next time.